Barron Trump called himself Trump 2.0, sneered at Harvard and Yale, and claimed genius blood. Seconds later, Jasmine Crockett froze Congress by revealing Barron Trump's SAT 2025 score 850. Gasps filled the chamber. Millions watched the mass collapse. Did one number just bury the Trump name forever? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The U.S. Capitol was no ordinary chamber tonight. The marble walls glowed under relentless lights. Cameras blinked red, and the silence was sharp enough to cut. Tens of millions of Americans leaned in, not for policy talk, but for a duel that felt like destiny. At the center, Barron Trump appeared, the son of the former president, wrapped in a pristine suit, shoulders square, jaw set, and the swagger of someone who believed the hall belonged to him. The press had crowned him the young genius, and he walked like the role was scripted for him alone. Across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman called the woman who fears nothing. Her hand rested on a heavy folder, edges sharp, pages, thick secrets sealed inside. One truth pulsed in the air. Can privilege disguise weakness, or will raw facts tear the mask away tonight? Under the sharp studio lights, Barron Trump leaned back in his chair, one hand resting casually on the armrest, while the other adjusted his tie. The cameras framed him perfectly, and he knew it. A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth as he began, his voice measured heavy with certainty. For years, people have been asking, am I just my father's son, or am I something more? Let me make it simple. I am Trump 2.0, younger, sharper, smarter. A modern version built for this generation. My father shook politics, but I'm here to dominate it. That's not arrogance. That's reality. He leaned forward, eyes locking on the lens, as if he were looking into the soul of every viewer. The media already know it. The ones that matter call me the symbol of a new era, the perfect heir. And they're right. Look at me. Do I look like someone who's built to finish second? No, I was born to lead. I don't need permission. I don't need approval. I was built for this. His tone sharpened, his chin lifting, as though daring anyone to contradict him. The room seemed to tighten as his voice dropped into a mocking rhythm. Harvard, Yale, overrated. They're factories, nothing more. Factories that churn out book dolls. Sure, they can memorize, they can ace a test, they can spit back what's in a textbook. But leadership, vision, courage, they don't have that. And that's what matters. America doesn't need more robots with diplomas. America needs instinct. It needs strength. It needs natural intelligence. That's what I bring. He tapped his temple twice, smirk never fading. The camera caught every movement, every pause. He leaned back again, a laugh slipping out as though the idea of competition amused him. Grades, please. Grades are for the people who can't think for themselves. Tests. That's for the ones without talent. I don't measure myself by letters on a piece of paper. I measure myself by impact. And let's be honest, every time I speak, the conversation changes. That's power. That's intelligence. His voice rose with confidence, building like a drumbeat. These professors, these so-called experts, they think sitting behind a podium makes them superior. They cling to their desks like it gives them authority. But authority doesn't come from lectures. Authority comes from vision. My IQ higher than theirs, no question. And unlike them, I don't need a degree to prove it. His eyes flashed, his words landing like punches. He straightened, pointing slightly toward the camera, his grin turning sharper. Trump 2.0 isn't just a nickname. It's the future. It's the upgrade. Smarter, faster, tougher than what came before. I don't need Harvard to bless me. I don't need a professor's nod. My path doesn't run through their classrooms, it runs through history. And history doesn't remember test scores. History remembers winners. He paused, letting the silence stretch, the smirk curling back across his lips. And I was born to win. Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, her eyes fixed on Barron, with the intensity of someone who had waited years for this exact moment. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like glass. You've bragged about having an IQ of 160, she said. You've mocked Harvard students as worthless. But all this time, you've never once released your SAT real scores. The words dropped like stones and the chamber stirred as reporters scribbled furiously. The accusation was clean, simple, undeniable. Barron tilted his head back slightly, lips curling into a smile that was half arrogance, half defiance. His eyes flicked across the crowd, scanning the cameras, knowing every movement would be replayed 1,000 times. "Sad is an outdated game," he replied smoothly. "My generation doesn't need rigid numbers to prove intelligence." The words were confident, but too polished, too rehearsed. His smirk lingered as if daring the audience to challenge him. Yet the more he smiled, the more brittle it looked under the glare of the lights. The response floated in the room like smoke, thin, fleeting, unable to hide the heaviness that followed. Senators exchanged wary glances, eyebrows raised in silent suspicion. Aides leaned closer to whisper to their bosses, their eyes never leaving Barron. Across the nation, in living rooms and bars, viewers began murmuring the same uneasy question: if he's so intelligent, why dodge the proof? The tension sharpened, turning curiosity into doubt, doubt into disbelief. This was the first crack in the armor, the moment when bravado met resistance. For the first time, Barron Trump was cornered, pressed against the wall by a truth he could no longer sidestep. And the storm was only beginning to break. The storm that had been simmering finally broke when Jasmine Crockett reached for the folder. Her fingers slid across the manila cover, precise, unhurried, as though she knew the entire nation was holding its breath. Every camera lens zoomed in, every microphone leaned closer, amplifying the scrape of paper against wood. Barron Trump's smirk faltered, for the first time the muscles around his jaw tightening, as though he sensed what was coming. Jasmine withdrew a single sheet, the official SAT score report dated 2025. The embossed seal glimmered under the harsh white lights. She held it high, letting the press catch sight of the bold lettering at the top before she spoke. Her voice was calm, sharp, each word dropping like iron into water. "This is the SAT score report for Barron Trump, year 2025. The result, 850 out of 1,600. The syllables rang through the chamber like a verdict. The reaction was instant silence. A silence so deep it felt physical, pressing against the walls of the Capitol hearing room. 850, well below the national average of roughly 1,050, put Barron not in the company of prodigies or leaders, but in the bottom rungs of performance. The number floated above the room, unshakable, unspinnable, as though it had weight of its own. Senators shifted uncomfortably, reporters froze with pens mid-stroke, and aides exchanged glances they didn't dare voice. Then the silence cracked. The chamber erupted in whispers, gasps, the staccato explosions of camera shutters firing like gunfire. Photographers surged forward, catching the moment his myth began to unravel. Viewers at home flooded social media with disbelief hashtags forming in real time. The scoreboard of Barron's life had just been revealed, and the result was humiliation. Barron's face flushed red as he leaned into his microphone, voice rising in defensive protest. "Test scores do not reflect true intelligence," he insisted, his tone clipped angry. "I have proven my superiority in the real world, not on a piece of paper." He tugged at his cufflink, adjusted his tie gestures that looked more like a drowning man reaching for air than a leader in control. His words echoed, but they fell flat, brittle, unable to fill the widening void. Jasmine didn't move from her seat. She placed the sheet flat on the desk, tapped it once with her index finger, and met Barron's eyes with unflinching calm. "If this score does not matter," she said coldly, "then why did you hide it? And why did you mock millions of hardworking students using the very standard you couldn't clear yourself?" The words cut deeper than the number itself, stripping away the last fragments of bravado. The camera zoomed in on the page. The ink was permanent: SAT 2025, 850 out of 1,600. It was no longer just a statistic. It was a collapse, a public demolition of the young genius myth. In that moment, with a single score laid bare, the mask Barron had built for years shattered beyond repair. This was the hinge of the story, the instant the legend died, and the truth stood naked in its place. The paper still lay flat on the desk, the black ink glaring beneath the lights when Jasmine leaned into the microphone again. Her voice was steady, her tone edged with steel, and she spoke not just to Barron, but to the entire nation watching. "Let me be clear," she said, her words carrying through the chamber. "The SAT in 2025 is not some forgotten relic. It is still a measure of logic, of reading comprehension, of discipline. It tells us whether a student can handle the very foundation of higher learning. It is not perfect, but it is real. She tapped the sheet once with her finger and continued, her voice cutting harder. 850. That's not just low. That is failure across both pillars, math and language. These are the basic skills that every student in this country is expected to master. When you stand here and call yourself a genius, yet fall short on the most essential test, what does that say? The silence around her was sharp, broken only by the clicking of reporters' keyboards. Her eyes narrowed and her words grew heavier, each one a strike. What makes this worse is not just the number, it's the privilege behind it. You had every advantage: private schools that cost more per year than most families, make personal tutors at your beck and call, resources that millions of hardworking kids could only dream of. And yet, with all of that, you still came away with an 850. She paused, letting the weight of the number hang again in the air. Jasmine's voice rose more forceful now, as if she wanted every parent watching at home to hear her. Meanwhile, across this country, students who work nights in diners, who study under dim lamps in trailers, who translate for their immigrant parents, are scoring 1,400, 1,500. They are clawing their way into Ivy League schools on grit and determination. They prove every day that discipline and work matter more than wealth and a famous last name. They prove what you never could. She leaned closer, her eyes locked on Barron, the sheet still between them like a weapon. This number is not just a score, it is proof. Proof of laziness. Proof of a lack of discipline. Proof that privilege without effort is worthless. The 850 is not a fluke, it is a mirror. It reflects exactly what you are when no one else can take the test for you. A murmur spread across the chamber, the sting of the words echoing louder than any shout. Jasmine's voice dropped lower, each word deliberate, final. For the public, this is not just a test result. This is the crack in your myth, Barron Trump. The mask of the young genius is shattered, and it cannot be put back together. Because tonight America sees you for what you are, not the heir to brilliance, but the heir to excuses. The room held its breath again. The score no longer belonged to a piece of paper. It belonged to history. Barron steadied himself and forced a smile, fingers spreading a glossy printout across the table, like a royal decree. He tapped the title line with theatrical pride, his excellent college essay submitted to Harvard, complete with bold claims and polished rhetoric. He lifted his chin toward the cameras, eyes bright, selling confidence, as if it were unbreakable. My score is low, but my creative thinking goes far beyond, he declared, the sentence ringing through the mics with defiant polish. He spoke of vision, originality, leadership that cannot be graded, layering each word like armor over a fresh wound. For a beat, the room hesitated, as if possibility had returned to him on the strength of a single page. Jasmine's answer was a small, measured smile that felt like a fuse being lit. She reached for another document, cream paper, crimson crest, the unmistakable weight of institutional finality, and held it where the cameras could feast. Harvard Correspondence 2025, she said evenly, letting the seal glint under the lights before she read. We appreciate your application, but your SAT score and academic record do not meet our standards. She lowered the page half an inch so the words could hang in the air without interference. The line landed with surgical calm, slicing cleanly through the glossy promises of an essay. The chamber detonated. Gasps burst into chatter, shutters cracked like hail, and a tide of whispers rolled from bench to bench. Barron's color drained, then flooded back too fast, leaving a blotchy heat that the cameras caught without mercy. His fingers hovered over the essay as if touch alone could restore its magic. But the Harvard letter sat beside it like a cold verdict. Senators leaned to staffers. Staffers typed heads down as though the floor itself had shifted beneath their feet. This was the third climax, the false rise, the brutal drop, the moment a comeback turned into a collapse. He cleared his throat, searching for a line that could hold against paper stamped in crimson and black. None came. The essay's sheen dulled in the shadow of the sentence everyone would remember. Around him, the audience no longer leaned forward in curiosity, but in certainty, watching a myth lose altitude in real time. The microphones did not spare him. They never do. And the echo that remained was not his boast, but Harvard's line, precise and final. The roar from the Harvard letter had barely settled when Jasmine leaned forward again, her voice low, almost conversational, but sharp enough to slice the silence. This isn't the first time the Trump name has been tied to academic fraud. She said, her tone steady, as if reminding America of something it already knew. She let the words hang, then continued. Michael Cohen, the man who once stood at your father's side, testified under oath that Donald Trump paid someone else to take his exams. That is the foundation of the myth. That is the soil you were planted in. The press shifted pens scratching harder, and the weight of history pressed down on Barron's shoulders like a shadow too heavy to move. She tapped the folder again, sliding out a new set of papers, emails printed in black and white, stripped of spin. And it didn't stop there, she continued, lifting a page for the cameras. These are from your own teachers and advisors. They speak of missed classes, assignments, ignored a pattern of laziness that could not be hidden by a famous last name. One wrote, and I quote, Barron relies on his family's power to escape consequences rather than doing the work himself. Another described you as absent more than present. Tell me, is that what genius looks like? The room rustled with unease, the sound of certainty being ripped apart. Barron's face hardened, but the cameras were merciless, drinking in every flicker of discomfort. Jasmine did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The world is now asking, she said slowly, has the so-called Trump intellect ever truly existed? Or has it always been smoke and mirrors, a performance bought and sold, but never earned? Her words were calm, but the impact was thunder. Senators glanced sideways, reporters typed as if racing against the clock, and the audience at home leaned closer to their screens, waiting for Barron to answer a question that could not be answered. Every line built on the one before each piece of evidence, connecting like links in a chain around his neck. The narrative was no longer about one test, one essay, one rejection letter. It had grown larger, reaching back into history, pulling down not just Barron, but the legacy of his entire family. The story was no longer about a single son failing. It was about a dynasty built on borrowed brilliance. The tension in the chamber shifted from disbelief to grim recognition, as though a curtain had finally been pulled back and the stage was bare. The myth cracked further, its pieces scattered across the marble floor. Barron Trump wasn't just exposed as weak, he was revealed as the heir to a weakness passed down like inheritance. And Jasmine's voice carried that truth to every corner of the country. This was not simply a fall from grace, it was the collapse of a family legend undone by its own lies. When the family legend cracked, the fallout hit fast. Barron was days from launching a youth Republican blitz campus rallies. Town hall tours, a glossy slogan stamped on banners and buses. The war room had a calendar with red circles and arrows, advisors talking about momentum, optics, and dominance. A hype video was cut to pounding drums, Trump 2.0, flashing across the screen like a promise. Donors had wired deposits for venues, and boxes of merch sat stacked like a small city. Then the SAT score went public and the room fell cold. Opponents did not waste a second. They posted billboards with a single number, 850. Debate prep clips turned into attack ads. If you can't clear a basic test, how will you clear a crisis? Rallies picked up a mocking chant, 850, 850, drowning out Barron's talking points. On TV, a rival smiled into the camera and said, leadership requires discipline. Numbers don't lie. Every soundbite Barron tried to offer came back to the same wall, the same digit, the same bruise. Donors read the headlines and reached for the brakes. Pledges went from confirmed to pending review, then to silence. Emails arrived with careful language. We are reevaluating our support in light of recent developments. A finance chair canceled the flagship fundraiser and said timing is not favorable. One senior advisor texted, we need distance and resigned by afternoon. Another sent a final memo that ended message no longer viable against 850. The staff felt it in their calendars. Campus invites vanished overnight. Hosts wrote, we must postpone. The scheduler's grid, once packed, showed empty hours and thin days. Volunteers stopped answering calls, then stopped calling at all. Polls dipped, then slid, then fell through the floor, and every new number told the same story as the first. Trump 2.0 stopped sounding like a promise and started sounding like a punchline. Barron tried to pivot, to talk policy, to talk vision, to talk anything but that sheet of paper. Reporters cut him off with the question everyone now carried. What about 850 clips of his defiance were spliced next to the score, like a split-screen pride on one side and proof on the other? The brand he built on swagger needed discipline to survive, And discipline was the one thing the moment demanded, and he could not supply. Sponsors asked for deliverables he could no longer provide. Credibility traction lift. The phones that rang all week now stayed quiet, and the silence sounded like judgment. In the end, it was not a scandal with moving parts. It was not a conspiracy or a smear. It was a number, plain, fixed, stubborn, repeated until it became the whole story. 850 turned crowds, donors, and allies away in a single sweep. And the dream of Trump 2.0 was crushed by the simplest force in politics, a fact that would not move. The collapse of Barron Trump's campaign was not just a political story, it was a cultural reckoning. The score alone, 850, became shorthand across America. In bars, classrooms, and break rooms, people shook their heads and muttered it like a warning. It wasn't the low score itself that drew the anger. Americans understood that anyone could stumble on a test. What stung, what turned the country's stomach, was the arrogance built on top of that weakness. People replayed his sneers about Harvard and Yale, his boasts about IQ, his dismissal of grades as meaningless. Now with the truth exposed, those words echoed louder than ever. It was not failure that enraged them. It was the swagger that came with it. Parents felt the anger most sharply. Millions of mothers and fathers who had sacrificed for their children's education watched the hearing with jaws clenched. They thought of the nights they worked double shifts, the mornings they clipped coupons, the weekends they spent tutoring and coaching, all to give their kids a fighting chance at college. "I clean hotel rooms to pay for my daughter's prep classes," one mother said in a televised interview. "She studies until 2 in the morning to keep her GPA high. And he mocks students like her, then hides an 850. The fury was personal. It was the insult of watching their sweat and sacrifice treated like a joke by someone who had every advantage and still failed. The story spread like wildfire across talk radio. Hosts called in parents, truck drivers, teachers, veterans, each voice boiling with the same conclusion: failure is forgivable, arrogance is not. If the kid admitted he was weak in math or reading, people would have respected that, one caller said. But instead, he strutted around calling himself a genius. That's what I can't stand. The sentiment repeated in 1,000 variations. Honesty could have saved him. Humility could have softened the blow, but arrogance made the fall absolute. In classrooms, teachers turned the scandal into a lesson. "This is why effort matters," one high school principal told his students. "Grades and tests are not everything. But character, admitting when you need help, respecting others' work, that's what lasts." The room of teenagers, many from working families, nodded as they scrolled through memes mocking Barron's downfall. They laughed at the hashtags, but they understood the point. Privilege without discipline collapses sooner or later. Editorials across the country struck the same chord. "The issue is not an SAT score," wrote one columnist. "It is the deception built on top of it. The American public does not hate failure. We hate hypocrisy." Another commentator wrote, "Barron Trump is not the first to stumble, but he may be the first to stumble so loudly, so arrogantly, and so publicly that it becomes a lesson for us all." The words spread, clipped into social posts, quoted on cable news. It became a chorus. This was bigger than one teenager. This was about values, and the values were clear. Americans wanted transparency. They wanted leaders who admitted their flaws instead of hiding them. They wanted effort over ego, authenticity over theater. Jasmine Crockett's words from the hearing were replayed over and over. "If this score does not matter, why did you hide it? And why did you mock millions of hardworking students using the very standard you couldn't clear yourself?" The line was etched into the debate like a scar, cutting away every excuse Barron's defenders tried to build. On social media, the reaction grew raw and unfiltered. Parents shared photos of their children studying late into the night, captioned with lines like 1,400, earned without tutors, without a Trump name. Veterans wrote about taking community college courses after deployments, pushing themselves to keep up despite exhaustion. Workers posted selfies in uniforms, saying they wished they had the chance Barron wasted. Every story drew the same point. Effort is worth more than privilege. Discipline is worth more than bragging rights. The anger turned reflective as weeks passed. Commentators began to ask what the scandal revealed about America itself. "We reward showmanship too much," one professor said on a panel. "We let polished images blind us to substance. The lesson of Barron Trump is that the mask will always crack, and when it does, only the truth remains." The professor's words landed because they matched what people already felt the fall was inevitable, because it was built on nothing real. And yet beneath the anger there was also a strange gratitude. For once a myth had collapsed in real time, and the public had seen the fracture live. There was no cover-up, no delay, no spin that could erase the number on that page. It was brutal, but it was honest. And honesty for a country tired of polished illusions felt almost like justice. The lesson hardened into a warning for the future. Leaders who pretended, who inflated, who mocked while hiding their own failures, those leaders would be exposed. The people would demand it. The echo of the scandal rang like a bell 850. It was more than a score. It was shorthand for the downfall of arrogance, the collapse of privilege without merit, the end of a dynasty's myth. Barron Trump stood as a living reminder, a cautionary tale etched in headlines and memes. His downfall proved that wealth could buy airtime, but it could not buy respect. It proved that arrogance without achievement collapses under its own weight. It proved that no dynasty, however powerful, can outrun the truth forever. And in the eyes of millions, the conclusion was simple. The score did not destroy him. The arrogance did. The failure was not in the test, but in the mask he wore. And when the mask cracked, America saw exactly what lay beneath. The roar of public judgment still echoed when the chamber drew tight again and the final act began. Barron rose unsteadily, the microphone catching the rough edge in his breath, his hands flattening the table as if it might steady him. The cameras pressed closer, unblinking, hungry for a resurrection that wouldn't come. His gaze swept the room, senators, staffers, the press wall, then fixed on the lens that led to millions of living rooms. He squared his shoulders like a man walking into rain. "I will prove it with actions, not with scores," he said, the words thrown like a lifeline across a rising tide. For a heartbeat, the chamber honored the sentence, holding it in the air to see if it could float. Barron tried to ride the silence, chin lifted, eyes hard, as if a single vow could erase ink already dry. He spread his palms, the gesture practiced, the confidence borrowed, selling resolve where proof had failed. A camera light blinked, then another, and his promise met the one number that would not move. Reporters glanced down at their notes, and the line, "I will prove it with actions, not with scores," sat beside 850 like a split screen nobody could unsee. The room waited, but momentum did not turn. Jasmine did not hurry. She never had to. She leaned into her mic with the calm of someone who knew the weight of her next words and was not afraid to use it. Her tone was even neither cruel nor kind, a surgeon's hand finding the pulse. "Failure is not shameful," she said, "but constructing a false image to humiliate others, that is what betrays the nation's trust." The sentence slid into the chamber like a steel door, and something on the other side of Barron's posture shut for good. He blinked, then looked down, a small movement that traveled like thunder through the hall. Shoulders folded first, then the neck, then the jaw, until the carefully arranged mass gave way to gravity. For a second, his reflection wavered in the polished wood, and the posture of a prince became the outline of a boy. The microphones caught no words because there were none to give, only the slow sound of a breath that did not steady. Across the country, a million homes saw the same image. Barron Trump had bowed silent before the verdict of his own story. Newsrooms moved as if on cue, banners sliding into place with the certainty of a verdict. "The day Barron Trump lost his luster," read the chirons, the headline marching from network to network like a bell toll. Anchors replayed the sequence, promise, rebuttal, silence, until the rhythm became a lesson set to film. Columns landed before dawn, each one tracing the arc from boast to number to truth. The photos all looked the same: a bright room, a lowered head, a myth reduced to scale. And the public did not need analysis. They had already read the ending in his posture. By nightfall, the moral was written in language anyone could understand. Power can buy airtime, but it cannot buy credibility. It can rent applause, but it cannot purchase trust. Power can buy media, but it cannot buy the truth, ran the primetime script. And for once, it felt less like commentary than common sense. The nation's elders, men and women who had worked too many shifts and paid too many bills to believe in glitter, nodded at the screen. They had told their children the same thing in smaller rooms and harsher years, and now a marble chamber echoed it back to them. "What endures is not fame, but honesty and effort," they said, repeating the line like a blessing or a warning or both. The cameras finally dimmed, but the picture did not fade. A vow without discipline, a brand without backbone, a dynasty without proof, these were the artifacts the day left behind. Barron's sentence still floated somewhere in the archive, brave and empty at once, a promise that arrived too late for evidence and too early for redemption. Jasmine's line, by contrast, clicked into the record with the frictionless force of truth. And as the nation exhaled, the tale closed on the only ending it would accept, not the triumph of noise, but the quiet, durable victory of facts. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.